All right, guys, you voted for it. We built it. Waterfall fiber optic star countertop using our metallic epoxy countertop kits. Check this thing out. Okay, the first thing we want to do, you can do waterfall countertops lots of different ways. We like the waterfall countertops that are flush with the counter. You can make them come out farther. There's lots of different ways you can do them. We want our waterfall edge to come right over the top and right down the side of the cabinet. So the first thing we want to do is fill this void. Here, come look at this. If we put a piece of wood up against this, there will be a void here because this sticks out. So the first thing we want to do is make it flush. And again, you can do this lots of different ways. There's probably carpenters watching us. They're gonna freak out. We're not doing it right. That's all right. We're gonna be quick. We just wanna show you guys how awesome this is. I'm out. Hold on. Okay, game on. Okay, the hardest part about a waterfall countertop is actually cutting it. So when they do real stone and real granite and they make a waterfall countertop, they actually take one seamless piece and they cut it at a 45-degree angle and they butt them up together. If you ever get a chance to look at them close, there's always a minor seam there that you can see. So what we want to do is we want to roughly set everything on the counter, and we want to actually cut this at a 45-degree angle this way. And then our vertical piece, we want to cut it the opposite. Like this. And we want to rip it all the way down the board so that when these are cut, they actually meet and there's a point here. So that when we coat these, and you'll see that later in the video, it's one seamless design going all the way down the side. Now, because we still need to cut these, it's important that these pieces don't move at all when we cut them. So we're gonna make sure that the edges are perfect all the way down. And obviously we can sand this a little bit. We're going to have to sand the faces a little bit, but we want to make this one piece for now. So we're just going to take like a brad nailer. You could nail in a couple skinny nails in different places. Now we can safely take this out to our saw and we can rip this down and not worry about it moving. And then we'll actually peel them apart to install the fiber optics. Now again, if you're not doing fiber optics, it doesn't matter. You can just do this part right here and leave it. We actually have to peel it apart to put our fiber optics in between the boards. And we're gonna do the same thing with this. We're gonna brad nail this together and make that cut. Okay guys, we got these cut roughly. Obviously we need to pull them back apart like I mentioned. We still need to run the fiber optics, but we wanted to rough them in. So as you can see, we got the 45-degree angles cut. This is what we mean by that. This edge isn't perfect, doesn't matter. We're gonna fix a lot of stuff with the epoxy, and we just wanna see how well it fits. And if it's even close, we can work with that. We're gonna do darker colors, and so if we need to do some small patches at the end, we can. It's not the end of the world. We may even decide to round and bevel this edge. So we're gonna do blacks and maybe silvers and maybe a little bit of white going through it. We haven't fully decided because we want to be able to hide some stuff, especially for the first waterfall feature. But as you can see, that's gonna look pretty cool when that's done, running all the way down the side. So now we're going to run the fiber optics and then coat them and put it on. Okay, what we've done is you saw how I had the boards on here. I just took them off and made them flat and put them on the table. You can see the 45s. Now I want to figure out what I want my design to look like. So I kind of want it to flow. I don't want it to be perfect, but I want this to look like it really flows over the edge. That's the whole idea of a waterfall countertop. So I think what I might do is maybe start a little skinnier, maybe branch out right at this edge about here, and then maybe even bring it back in a little bit. I just want it to flow. Same thing right here. Maybe it gets skinny. Something like that. And you can do just about anything, but what I want to do is I need to get a gauge at where I'm at, because this is where I'm going to run the fiber optics. I'm going to run the fiber optics into these panels like this. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to decide how many fiber optics I want. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start marking holes. This is where I want all of them. This is the hard part. You may need help with this one. You get the idea, and I'm going to do that all the way across, and then I'll show you what we're going to do next. Okay, what we're going to do is you can kind of see the design. We put the holes where we want to put the fiber optics and the stars, and now we want to carefully just peel it up. Remember, we just put a couple thin nails in it, like brad nails, so we want to take a little spatula, tap it under, it should peel right up. See? And you just want to work it, and it'll come completely apart. Now, one thing I want to point out is, notice right here, I put like a nose zone. So obviously, we don't want to be drilling holes on this part of the countertop, because it's just going to be really weak and really fragile until we put them together. So I just made a line. I don't want to drill any holes right here. It's very important that we don't. So just create somewhat of a nose zone right here where the joints meet. And now we're going to drill some holes in it. Okay guys, here's the fiber optics. You're going to need something like this. We just got like almost 5,000 feet, lineal feet of fiber optic. This is 1 millimeter. It's about average, I guess. Average, you could say that. They make them thinner, they make them really big. We wanted a kind of a medium-sized star on our counter. So we just got a full roll of 1 millimeter fiber optics. And then we got a lighting source with a switch. We'll show you how to connect this later. We got all this stuff from, I believe, fiberopticproducts.com. Fiberopticproducts.com. It's real original. Just type that in and it'll pop right up. And yeah, it looks like it is. It's a 16 watt single port light unit. So that's neat. So what we're gonna do is, we know that this is about 1 millimeter. We need to drill these holes. So I got a drill bit that's just a little bit bigger, a skosh bigger. We're using our big boy words now. It's a skosh bigger than the fiber optic. So move this over here. We have all of our holes. Notice I'm only going through the top layer now. And now I'm just gonna start drilling through these holes. So let's make sure that the fiber optic fits. And it does. So it does, it fits through. So now we're just gonna take our time, and these bits are really flimsy, they could break, so you might buy a couple of them. Everywhere where you want a star, just drill a hole. Obviously be careful not to drill into something below what you're working on. So we're just gonna continue to drill all of these holes out, and then we'll show you how to run the fiber optics next. Now that we have all the holes drilled, we need to figure out how we want to run the fiber optics. So out of both of these panels, obviously they're gonna sandwich this. So we need to figure out where we want all of our wires to come out. And what I think is there's a lot of room behind this drawer. So I think we want to mount our light behind this drawer or even lower, which means I want the wires to come out in this area of the cabinet. So we need all of our wires to come out around here. So now that we have all of our holes drilled, I know that I want all of my wires to come up to about this area and also come out from the board about a foot. You always want to give yourself lots of room with fiber optics because you can't redo a fiber optic once these boards are sandwiched together. So I'll show you how to do this. You're going to take your fiber optics. We'll set this board up. You can see all the holes. And we may want to scrape. We may want to scrape or sand the back of this. So where we drilled the holes, it just pushed some wood out. We want to try to keep these pieces as flat as we can. So now that we have that flat, we're going to take our fiber optic and we're going to just start at the top and we're going to poke it through the hole. It's kind of can be a pain. Maybe I gotta stick it through this side.
That's not a hole.
Oh, that's the problem. Okay. We're gonna stick it through the hole here, because that's actually a hole. And see how far we're gonna stick it out? We wanna leave it out probably about 3 or 4 inches. Then we're gonna take this on the back, and here I'll try to do this. You typically want a little bit of help, but my cameraman's doing the camera. And I just wanna put a staple in it. Right there. Now, this right here, it's not moving. That's all you're trying to do. And then I want to run this wire because again, well, this will be going to here actually. So I want to take that wire and I want to leave it out about a foot, maybe even a little longer, and I want to cut it off. And we don't have to worry about it past that. And you do all of your fiber optics that way. Let's do another one. Obviously, I stapled it the wrong way. You typically want to go the other way. Because I'm heading towards that corner, I got backwards. Now, notice how it's not very flat. That's okay. We can pound those staples in later. The biggest thing is we don't want this pulling out. So it just has to be at a 90-degree angle going through the hole. This isn't really going to move. And again, we want to take it past this. And we will end up just shutting the camera off and doing this and then showing you what it looks like at the end. But you want to take it past it, cut it, and this is gonna look like a mess for a little bit. There's gonna be fiber optics everywhere. We'll show you how to clean it up in a little bit. So the first thing you wanna do is run all your wire to about the point you want it to come out of the board and run it a foot past the board. All right, we're gonna run these and then we'll show you what it looks like. Here's what the board will look like when you're done mounting all of these. You can notice the front looks fairly clean. The back looks crazy, but notice I can pull them all to this corner because I ran them all to this corner. And some of these nails, they might be really high. You can't get them perfectly flat because you'll smash the fiber optic, but if you have really high ones, you can pound them down just a little bit. You want to make it as flat as possible. And now what we're going to do, let's see here. I will set it on top of this. We want to run. It's like braiding my daughter's hair, only much easier. So we want them to be sticking out of the back. So we want them to just kind of flow we're gonna grab a zip tie and we're gonna zip tie it a couple inches out from the board. Because we know we have enough slack for all of them. Looks like this guy. You want to make sure they're not tangled very much. And then I like to put a couple more zip ties down on it so that it's just not out of control. So we've done our first panel, and now we're going to do, so if I lay this down, this is coming out right about where I want it. So now we're going to do this panel, and the same thing. We want the strands to come to the same point on the board so that when we sandwich it on here, we can plug both of them into the light source. It's that simple. It's actually a pretty simple technology. It looks intimidating, takes a little bit of work, but it's pretty simple. So yeah, now you know how to braid hair. Now that we have our two boards completely done with the fiber optics, both of them, both of the pigtails, the end of the fiber optics coming out where we want them, you'll notice there's a big gap. I knew there would be a big gap because you have the width of the staples, you have the width of the fiber optics, but because we're going to coat this with epoxy, you're going to be able to hide a lot of stuff. The biggest thing we want to do is make sure that none of these fiber optics are moving around. We want everything solid in between this wood. And a lot of people don't know that spray foam is one of the greatest adhesives on earth. Trust me, it'll blow your mind how well this sticks to everything. This is essentially like Gorilla Glue. So what we're going to do is we're going to pick this up. Don't get this on your hair. Don't get it on your skin. It is nasty. So the biggest thing we want to do is just make sure all of our corners line up on the back end, not the 45. We're going to have to mess with that later. We just want all of our corners and all of our sides to match perfectly. And then we just want to hold this in place . While it's curing. Now, when this I call it Gorilla Glue, sorry. When this spray foam cures, you're not going to be able to rip these boards apart. So we're just trying to get it to hold in place while everything's setting up. So again, we've made it one piece again. And now we're just going to let the spray foam do its thing. It's going to come out the sides. Yeah, matter of fact, you can even run a bead of foam down the sides and always shave it off later, even though it probably will already foam up. There's a lot of foam in there, so it will expand. Probably a little too much. It's okay. go. So now we're gonna move these to some tables and we're gonna let them dry and then show you what to do next. Okay, we have it, all the spray foam is hard. We're gonna fill in some gaps later. So the next thing, in theory, is we wanna take we call this belt sander, and we wanna take this 45 back down, flush together. Because we had to sandwich the boards when we separated them, it created two different levels of MDF. So now we just wanna flatten this back out again on both pieces so that it meets perfectly again. That went really fast. So we may do a little more precise sanding with like a palm sander because this is pretty radical. This is like 50 grit sandpaper. So we wanted to cut down most of it, and now we'll probably palm sand it with like maybe 80 to 100, 120, just to take it down perfectly so that it sandwiches together really nice again. And then we'll address the sides, but yeah, it's still going according to plan. Okay guys, the spray foam didn't do exactly what I wanted it to do, so I realized we're just gonna shave off the spray foam. We're going to patch everything, all voids, all holes, using Bondo. We love Bondo for projects like this because it's extremely durable. It sands well, it gets really hard, and it bonds to a lot of things. So the next thing we're going to do is scrape these flush as much as we can, and we want to actually fill everything with Bondo and get it perfectly smooth again.
Probably good.
We'll just time lapse it, you know?
Yeah. That's a pretty big gap.
You getting it?
Mm-hmm.
All right, now we have our Bondo on here. It's been a few hours. This stuff dries really fast though. I want to mention a couple things before we sand this. So we filled it in. We left the Bondo thick, so we didn't want it perfectly flat. We went back and added a little bit more and made sure that it had a little bit of a build so that we didn't have to add a second layer, which we may have to after we sand it, but we tried not to. So we're gonna take a palm sander with 120 and we're gonna sand this down to where it's almost perfectly smooth. But I want to point out something, because as you move these panels around, you got to be careful. This is where the pigtail kind of comes out of this board, and I want you to know that these are somewhat fragile. If you bend them a lot, they will break. So you want to be careful. If you have people helping you or you're moving these boards around a lot, just be careful of these pigtails. You want to be very gentle with them. Just kind of hang them off tables. You don't want to bend them too much. If you get them in Bondo and they get a bunch of Bondo around them and it becomes rigid, they could just snap. So just be aware. You may even want to tape them off around the board to protect them from getting anything on them. So right now, we're just gonna sand this so that you can see what it'll look like. So this is perfectly flat. This is good to go to be coated. We could prime this and do our epoxy on it and you won't see anything. So that's what we're going for. Now, if you're sanding and you find that there's still voids, you can fill it in with either more Bondo or sometimes on the second coat. It'll be a lot easier if you use like sheetrock mud just to fill the tiny little voids and make it really smooth. So yeah, we're just gonna sand every edge of this really flat so that it's perfect and looks like one solid piece, and then we will do the metallic epoxy on top. Okay, we're just going to dry fit these again just to make sure it still fits really nice. So I'm just gonna scoop this in again, and I have it shimmed up off the floor with like 1/8 of an inch so that I make sure this corner is level with this. So it still fits really well, but you'll notice there's a slight gap now. I'm not as concerned about that. We're still gonna be able to fix a lot of things when we coat this. But now what I wanna do is I actually wanna round the edges a little bit and make it a little more natural, or like a piece of granite. We don't like 90-degree sharp angles because the epoxy doesn't really stick to the corner very well. It's just very thin there. So we want it to flow over the edge nicely. We're just gonna sand these edges really quick, and you can watch how fast it really is. Okay, you can see how it's nice rounded edge now. We could even hand sand that a little bit to finish it up. I want to point out something, that when you're using a palm sander, if you even get close to where these fiber optics are coming out of the board, it'll slice it immediately. So even right here, I won't hit this with a palm sander. I'm gonna do it by hand. Don't get the palm sander anywhere near these if you can't avoid it. But we are going to palm sand this edge because we want to round this edge as well. All right, we have this laid out. We're getting ready to coat it. Let me show you what we've done. We've cut somewhat of a template out for when we spray. We're gonna do a spraying effect on this. So we didn't want to spray on the black. So what we did, if you notice, there's a number 1 and number 2. We just made some rough cardboard templates that kind of fit over all of this. Here's 4. You can kind of see it's not perfect, but it follows our lines roughly. And we got to grab the other one. We have another one for this spot right here, but I just wanted you to see that when it comes time to coat this board, we want to do some effects. So if you don't want to get a color or a spray on the rest of the project, just cut out some cardboard. It's pretty simple, it's cheap, it's easy. So now that we've got these ready, what we want to do is we want to prime the board, and then we want to do our metallic epoxy process. But these are really tall. Some of these things are 6 inches tall, 4 or 5 inches tall. We want to take them down to about 3/4 of an inch to an inch. So we just take some wire cutters and we're just going to cut them. And why we're doing that is because when we paint our primer on, it's going to be a lot less messy if we can just paint through, you know, a 3/4 inch fiber optic instead of having all this stuff get epoxy and primer everywhere and they're getting on your arm. So we just want to cut them down to a more manageable height. So that's all we're going to do here. And then we're going to mix up the primer. And once we've mixed up that primer, we will show you how we're going to apply that. We're not really going to roll it on this time. We're going to apply it with a paintbrush so that we can control it a little bit better. And again, you want to be careful. The fiber optics are still somewhat delicate, so you don't want to be like smashing down, leaning on the board, because they could snap off right at the base, and we're not ready for them to yet. Perfect. We're gonna do the same with this board. Okay, the primer is mixed up, ready to go. We're gonna paint that on. Before we do, I wanna tape off this 45. I don't want any more material getting on this 45 because they butt up against each other really well right now. So I'm going to use standard Scotch tape, 3M Scotch tape,
And just tape right on the line.
Painter's tape probably won't stick very well to this. That's why we want to use this Scotch tape. And we're going to do the same thing to this side. Obviously, it'd be a lot easier if the boards were tipped up. If you find that your 45 is dusty, the tape won't stick very well to it, so you may need to peel it off and redo it. But we just want to tape those for now. Put some gloves on, and then we will prime this. Again, I mean, a roller would be faster, but we don't want to use it on this because we don't want to hurt these. So the idea is that we're just going to go and be careful around these. And it could be a little tedious, but that's all right. It's going to be worth it, right? The edges that you're going to see are going to be this edge, and the back edge. So we may want to prime them a couple times. You may actually want to start on this face first, allow it to kind of dry. Allow it to dry, and then we'll paint on a couple primer coats on that. You want it really black. Okay, we've leveled out these boards. It may take a little bit to level out the boards. You want the boards to be perfectly level both ways so the epoxy doesn't just continue to flow off. We have our black base coat mixed up, and I'm just gonna pour that kind of on the border of the fiber optics and kind of help it flow in there. The other thing I've done, here, why don't you come around here? The other thing I've done is I have taped over where the fiber optics are going in the board. I don't want to get a bunch of epoxy on that because when it sets up and gets hard, it'll make the fiber optics brittle. So it's actually not a bad idea to have them taped off for the entire process, but we wanted to for the epoxy for sure. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna spread our epoxy out and kind of get it on everything, saturated into the primer, so that it'll start leveling out easier. These fiber optics really are tedious, but it's kind of nice the epoxy will self-level. So now we kind of need to determine how we want our metallics and the look of the metallics to flow. So I want my design to follow the fiber optic stream going down the side of this cabinet. So when I'm adding my color, I'm gonna try to get it to flow within the fiber optics. I need to determine, what do I want the outside to look like? Do I want all the metallic epoxy to flow in that direction? Because if so, on the outside of my metallic epoxy, I really need to be doing a lot more back and forth to finish off the look of it, even before I add my colors. You see how I just want it to kind of flow? So right now they're going back and forth. That will affect the look of the design. So I might just follow the design a little bit. And then when I add my colors, I'm gonna do the same thing, only inside where the fiber optics are at. And notice how thick this epoxy is. Anytime you do projects like this, you always wanna have a real thick, high build of epoxy. I'll just quickly, if you glide it over the top quickly, it kind of creates these kind of jumping effects. So, and what we'll do is we'll just let that level out for a few minutes before we add our silver and then our white dispersing agent on top. Okay, now I want to add the silver, but I want to add the silver just within my river, maybe not even on the outside so much. I don't want to try to be outside the fiber optics. If he brings the camera down here, you can kind of see where I want to follow. So and the whole idea of a board like this is you want to go all the way across so that it matches from board to board. And the black is a fairly potent color, so I think we want lots of silver, because when we start blending it, that black is going to absorb a lot of this silver. Okay, we can always add more highlights, but remember, you can't take highlights out. You can always add more. So then we want to take the same brush, we have the black. We're just gonna kind of chop it a little bit, going up and down. And I want to try to stay within the boundaries that I've set for myself. But I want it to flow just a little bit. I'm just gonna go back and forth, working around these things. If you blend it too much, it'll make the silver just turn into black. So I'm trying not to disrupt it too much. So you can kind of see that there's some slight color. I like it a lot more where you can kind of see the silver. So I think we're gonna add a little more, maybe a little more concentration of silver and do the whole technique again just to try to lighten up this area. Okay, now we want to do, we got 91% isopropyl alcohol with snow white metallic in it. Now what we're going to do is just disperse it right down this river effect. We're trying not to get any on the outside, which is why we have this template cut here. And we're just going to squirt just a little bit as we go. And you got to shake it up, keep it shooken up. Okay, so after you spray the isopropyl, it has this dispersing effect. Sometimes it'll separate all the way down to the primer, so you can just dab it in. See how it's down to the primer? If you just dab it in with your finger, when you have a glove on, it'll level back out and fill in. So you just want to kind of look over your board and see if there's any big craters that you really need to dab. And we just have that one. There might be a little bit here. But really we don't have many. We didn't use a lot of alcohol. Awesome. Okay, as you go on, if you see there's drips or runs, you want to get a new paintbrush because we dipped our black in the silver. So now we actually need a new paintbrush. So if you want to just get it saturated with your drips,
it'll be a lot easier to work with. And then you can just hit those drips. If you have runs, just hit them to knock them back down. Like here's some runs at the end here. And you can do that periodically to stay up on the drips. Then we'll wait another probably 45 minutes and then we'll pull this tape so that we don't have a buildup of epoxy right there. Okay, it's been about an hour since we've done this. Now we're just gonna peel this tape off. Difficult. There we go. So now that should be a clean raw edge under there and it should be done dripping. Okay, this is the next day. It's been about, we'll say about 12 to 14 hours. The epoxy still has a little bit of softness to it, but it's basically set up and ready to go. Now what we want to do is we just want to take a palm sander. Use 220 on the palm sander. I'm going to use 120 just because we don't have any 220. But the vibration and the speed of a palm sander will just slice these off right at the surface level, and it'll also level out any kind of bump we have that kind of elevated and gathered around each of those fiber optics. So we want to just level that out. But I don't want to stick on one place very fast. You're going to notice that I'm going to go over this whole board in probably 10 to 15 seconds. I'm just gonna go back and forth really quick because a lot of the color that we added, especially with the dispersing agent, the white, it's still sitting on top a little bit. I mean, it did marbleize and sink down into the black base coat, but a lot of it still is on the surface. So we wanna be very fast with this. It's gonna be even better with 220, but you'll see with 120, it can still get the job done. Now, it'll dull out some areas. When we flood coat this with a clear coat, it'll bring all the color back, it'll bring all the dullness back. It'll be pretty amazing. So now notice I didn't want to interrupt the black on the edges very much at all. So I just wanted to focus on the fiber optic areas. Okay, we blew it off and now we just want to wipe it down with water. We don't really want to use acetone or denatured alcohol or any kind of chemical for this part because again, we don't want to disrupt any of the coloring as much as possible. So we just want to remove all the dust. right, now that it's been sanded, we wiped it down with just a damp, wet rag. Brushed off any dust. If you need to sand the edges at all, I would do it by hand, not with a palm sander. You don't want to eat through this because a palm sander will eat through it quickly, especially when it's not 100% cured. So if you do need to hit your corners or your edges or anything that's more delicate, not the top, you're going to want to sand that by hand. So now, again, we're just going to flood it with a clear epoxy and lock in all of these fiber optics. Okay, once everything's been kind of leveled out, you want to just go and look in different lights to see if there's any dry spots on the board, especially with clear coats. Clear coats are kind of hard to see what's been hit and what hasn't been hit, especially when it's over current epoxy. So you just want to go in all the lights, make sure that there's no dry spots that you didn't hit so that the epoxy can level out over those areas. And then if you have some fine bubbles or little bubbles, you can just hit it with a torch or like a heat gun just to pop those. Most of the time, you shouldn't have many bubbles when you're doing a clear coat. So we'll watch this over the next 5 to 10 minutes and just check for any kind of bubbling that tries to come up. Again, we'll wipe the bottom edges with drips. Yeah, and we'll show you what to do next. Okay, it's the next day after we applied the top coat, and now we flip the boards over. I have them setting on a towel because the epoxy is still somewhat soft. You may actually want to wait a couple days, but we want to get this project done for you guys. So we're doing it the next day. You'll notice there's a lot of drips because we didn't want to stick around and wipe drips for like 45 minutes to an hour. So we planned on sanding them down anyway. So we want to show you that process. Notice the edge got a little bit because we didn't re-tape it on the clear coat. There's a lot of drips here. These have to be flat for the counter to look good and sit solid against the cabinet. So we just want to sand them flat. You can use anywhere from 100 to 120 grit sandpaper on like a palm sander, an orbital sander. So that's what we're going to do now. Okay, and you can see you do want to expose a little bit of wood. That ensures that it's completely flat. We're going to switch the sandpaper because this is getting old, and just continue to do the whole board. And we'll also hit this 45 right here. All right, guys, as you can see, it's coming along nicely. There's a little bit of a gap here. Again, at the end of the video, I'm gonna show you how to not have any gap here. Since this is the first one we learned, you're gonna learn from our mistakes. It's actually not doing that bad, but right here, we're gonna need to paint that black so you really can't see it because this is exposed. We kind of forgot about that aspect. We have to do it afterwards anyways, but if you can see, it's coming along and it's gonna have these lights in it. I mean, everything's working according to plan. The epoxy's still somewhat soft. We're trying to do this quick though. Yeah, it's gonna look absolutely phenomenal. So we'll show you what to do next. We're just gonna set this up and probably tape off the edges, and we're probably just gonna spray paint this 3 or 4 times and make that black so it's not as noticeable. Get ready to mount these on the side and the top. We're just gonna use some glue, some more brads that we're gonna shoot in from the back just to hold it while the glue is setting up. One of the issues, if you look here, when we use the spray foam, because we didn't have any spacing, you'll notice the gap here is a lot closer than over here. Yeah, that's gonna create an issue with the 45, so we'll have to clean up that 45 a little bit better. But we're gonna wanna go ahead and get spray foam on this, because again, it's one of the best adhesives in the world. And that will expand, which makes it really nice. Hold that for me. And then what we'll do, we'll hold that there for a second. We're gonna put some wood glue on top of the cabinet. Now remember, it doesn't take much. These are already pretty heavy, so you don't need much wood glue. You notice we do have a gap there. We knew we'd have a gap there. We're gonna fill that with some black epoxy, let it set up, and then if we need to, we could even float this again with the clear epoxy. But again, we're gonna show you how to do this project all over again in a different way where you're not gonna deal with this gap. It's gonna be absolutely perfect. So obviously you're gonna wanna watch the second video for that. But we'll let this set up, and then we will hook up the lights and show you what it looks like. All right, we added some weight just to make sure that everything's flat while it's gluing. But while that's drying, let's show you the light system back here. Again, we're gonna show you a better way to run the fiber optics, but if I was to mount this permanently, because we may do another top on this, so we won't do it permanently, I'd probably drill a hole right here and run both of these strands into that hole and have them come out the other side. And then I would take this light unit, because all these fiber optics just need to go to the end of this light unit. We're gonna cut them all the same size. So I would mount this light unit flat, I don't know if you can see that, flat on the inside right here, so that the fiber optics would essentially come around, come through a hole, and go right into the lighting unit. And then it's like a lot of different cabinets where you essentially just have to plug this in somewhere, and the fiber optics actually have a remote to the LED system. So we're at least going to get all these cut and tied together so that you can see what it looks like with the fiber optics on when it's done, because we want you to see that. And I think we will drill the hole and mount these up against the wood. So we'll do that now. Okay guys, as expected, even from the beginning, there is a little bit of a gap here, so we're going to address this gap. One of the reasons why we went with black is because we knew for our first time there would be a gap. We're going to address that in another video. So we just want to fill it with some black silicone because silicone is high gloss. So we're going to tape off on each side of this crack as close to the crack as you can absolutely get it. We'll do the same thing on the bottom. And then what we'll do is we also want to tape down the side here. Just remember, anywhere you don't tape, we'll get silicone on it. I'm not as concerned about the back. We're gonna have some water here and a rag. I have the black silicone and we're just gonna put it in the crack. Just a little bit, we don't need much. I'm using an automatic gun. You don't need to, obviously. Yeah, that's the bad part about automatic guns. It's going a lot faster than I thought, so we'll have to wipe that. Okay, that should be good. Let's pull the tape. You don't want to wait too long to pull the tape, because if the silicone starts setting up, well, you have probably 20 minutes. But if you start pulling it up, it'll actually pull like rubber. It'll pull the edges. So we want to try to do it early. Hey guys, thanks for watching. What a fun project. We learned a lot from this project and we hope you did too. Don't forget, subscribe to our channel for all the new content we're releasing for you. Comment below, what are some of the ideas you guys have? We want to hear it. Maybe we'll attempt it. We need some ideas too, just because we want to coat the world. Remember, Leggari.com has you covered.